Welcome to Free Pilot Training. Today, I've got Seth Lake with me here, and we're going to talk about seven things you need to know before purchasing an airplane. I'm super stoked about today's video. I've got Seth with me here, and I think this is a really common question of someone getting into aviation. Like, what are some of the things I need to know about buying an airplane? Because it's not like buying a car at all.
Right. Yeah. Not at all.
Yeah. I made this mistake when I very first got my license. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get an airplane. And wait a second, there's a lot to this.
Yeah. I mean, with a car, it's just a car, right? There's no federally mandated maintenance that you do on your car. Your car isn't federally registered. Most people's cars, when they stop working, don't potentially just kill you and fall out of the sky.
Yeah, you can just pull over the side of the road if it takes a jump on you.
There's a lot of things to consider there, and I think that's kind of the reason why people have problems buying airplanes is because they think, well, I've bought other stuff before and it hasn't been a big deal, and I'll just buy this. Also, planes aren't. This is kind of a weird thing to say. But planes aren't as reliable as cars.
That's good to know.
When I tell that to people, they kind of look at me like, oh, that's worrisome. And on the face of it, I guess it does sound like that. But, I just ask everybody, when's the last time you've gone out to your car and your car doesn't start? Or you did a run-up in your car and then just went back into the garage and didn't drive it that day.
Didn't go to work.
I can't remember a time I went out. I mean, I have a pretty reliable car, but I've had like kind of unreliable cars where there's definitely that kind of worry. Yeah. Anyway, I can't even describe how many times that I've gone out to a plane and then not flown that day because something's wrong with the plane. So it's not that planes are like dangerous or anything like that. It's just there's so many systems that could go wrong in a plane, and you're reliant on those systems so much that it's just not as reliable. And the other thing is these planes, especially if this is your first airplane, it's probably an older, 60s model, or even older potentially. You're dealing with like 1920 technology, so it's just not very reliable, and you have to spend a lot of money to keep it going.
Yeah. And by the way, this video is also available on podcast version, and I'll put a link in the description if you'd rather listen to it that way. But the first thing you need to know for buying an airplane is, we're talking about logbooks. What do we need to know about logbooks?
Okay, so logbooks can be a little overwhelming. Yeah. First of all, you really need to have all of the logbooks. So you've probably seen listings or discussions online about a plane missing logbooks, and that has a big impact on the value. Yeah. If the plane's missing logbooks, the concern is that there could have been some major damage done to that airplane that was documented in that lost logbook, and now I don't know what that damage was or how that damage was repaired. Yeah. So that definitely has an impact on the plane. Whenever you buy a plane, what you're looking for is continuity of logbooks. And we keep saying logbooks because you want a logbook for each major item of the plane that could be removed from the plane and kind of have its own life elsewhere. So what I mean by that is like typically you have, for a single engine airplane, you're going to have 3 or maybe 4 logbooks. You'll have an engine, airframe, and propeller. Yeah. Those will be the 3. The 4th one is maybe avionics. Don't see that one as much, and that's not required. But you could have up to 3. Now, technically, legally, you could just have 1. Yeah. Your engine, propeller, and airframe are all in the same logbook. That's not very common, though, because let's say I buy a new engine. I upgrade my engine, and I sell that engine. Well, that engine, if I want to send its logbooks with it, I've got to transpose everything that's all tied up. So it's easier just to keep a separate set of engine logbooks. Yeah. That way, when you get rid of that engine or you go buy a new engine, it comes with all of its history.
I've seen usually too with like trainer planes with fixed props. A lot of times you'll see
Yep.
just the engine and the airframe.
Right, and not one for the propeller.
Yeah.
That's not that uncommon to see that. But what you're looking for is continuity. So if you buy an airplane that was built in 1970, you want to see all the maintenance that's been done from 1970 to current. And some things that I'm looking for are gaps, right? Because that could be an impact on the valuation of the plane. That could be something I can negotiate around. And what I mean by that is, let's say it was built in 1970 and the plane only has 500 hours on it. That's odd, right?
That's very odd.
1970 was several years ago, and a lot of times, so that plane hasn't flown very much. So what happened? Well, I either have a missing logbook, or maybe that plane was built in 70, had a major accident on 71, and sat in a scrapyard for 30 or 40 years, and then somebody rebuilt it, right? Well, that I need to know that, right? That'd be good to know. Then that's kind of a drastic example. Something more common is to see like a 5 or 6 year gap where the plane just sat. Planes don't like sitting.
Yeah.
So if you're buying a plane that hasn't flown in 5 or 6 years, you can tell that from the logbooks, and you need to take account of that when you're trying to put a value on that plane, because a plane that sat for 5 to 10 years, there's a lot that could go wrong with it that next 100 hours that you fly it.
Yeah. And so would that be a deal breaker if you're missing, like, I don't know, maybe half of the logbooks?
No, it wouldn't be a deal breaker, but it would be something that I would negotiate as a buyer. The seller should know that, hey, this is going to have an impact on the sales price. The buyer, I might, as a buyer, if I'm missing logbooks, it kind of depends on which one. So our 1970s model example, if I'm missing 1970 to 1980, and the plane's flown 4,000 hours since then, maybe I'm not as concerned about that. It's been flying a lot since those logbooks were lost.
And it hasn't seemed to have many issues since then.
Right. Now, if it's missing its most recent logbook, that's going to have a bigger impact, because now I don't even know if it's in annual, or what the status of the ADs are. So that's something that I'm definitely going to take into account.
Okay, so the next thing you should know is, should we have a pre-buy inspection?
So that's just a terrible question, because absolutely, absolutely you should have a pre-buy. The question should be, what should I cover on my pre-buy?
Okay.
Who should do it? How do we handle the pre-buy or the pre-purchase inspection? That's the pre-purchase inspection is probably the most important thing about buying an airplane. If you have a good pre-buy or pre-purchase, that will make your life a lot easier. Yeah. And this is sometimes, it's kind of, you get what you pay for, and look at it as an investment. Those are the two things that I'll tell you. If you have a really poor pre-buy done, you go out and buy that airplane, and you might be buying an airplane that has a lot of discrepancies that you didn't know about because you didn't have a good pre-buy done, that you're going to wind up buying problems. You're literally buying problems that you're going to have to take care of as a new owner. So a good pre-buy inspection, it might cost you $1,000 or $2,000.
Yeah.
And that's a tough pill to swallow, especially if you decide not to buy that airplane. Because now I just paid a mechanic $2,000 to do this 2 or 3 days of inspection, and then I decided to move on. That's a hard pill to swallow, but believe me, it's better than buying that airplane.
Yeah, and I've talked to sellers before, and I asked, hey, I'd like to get a pre-buy inspection. Is there anyone in the area that can do this? And they're like, well, why do you need a pre-buy inspection? It's an annual. What do you say to that?
Yeah.
They're trying to sell it, aren't they?
Yeah, they're trying to sell it. This is where negotiation, man, results vary so much. It just varies so much. If you find somebody that's good at doing pre-purchase inspections, they're going to know how to negotiate on your behalf. So kind of they become your agent, really. And they'll say, hey, the guy I'm representing has the money, he's ready to buy this airplane, but I need to look through it to make sure we're not getting a bad airplane.
Yeah.
And this is where some negotiations has to happen, because the seller may not want the plane to leave the field, right? They probably don't want you to come pick the airplane up, fly it somewhere,
Yeah.
and do that's probably not a good idea. That's in everyone's best interest, probably not to do that. So you need to send a mechanic to that field, have that, that mechanic's going to have to bring enough tools for him to do the inspection as required for whatever type of airplane you're buying. And then there's probably going to be some negotiation that happens of what are you allowed to inspect and what are you not allowed to inspect, right? Because if I'm the seller, well, I don't want this mechanic I don't know to come in and start disassembling the airplane.
Yeah.
Right? That could cause problems. So generally it's, hey, I'm going to remove, I want to be able to remove all inspection panels. I want to pull the valve cover off one cylinder, maybe. I want the ability to bore scope the engine, which again might involve pulling a valve cover off at a minimum. It might involve probably not a cylinder removal. We're not going to go that far, but I want to basically spell this out. And again, somebody that's good at pre-buy inspections is going to know, hey, this is all the stuff that I want to do in the pre-buy.
And this is stuff like, I mean, obviously I'm not going to go over there and bore scope the engine myself because I'm just not that familiar with that type of stuff. So, I mean, this is just something that you can't do yourself a lot of times.
Yeah, probably not. And I mean, if you're an A&P, obviously you and inexperienced, of course you could do it yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're a layperson and new to the aviation world, no, you absolutely can't do this. Do not judge a plane by the way it looks because I can get a plane paint corrected for a couple $1,000s. So I could go out and buy a really bad airplane, have a couple $1,000s on a paint correction, and make that airplane look really good.
Yeah.
And you're going to fall in love with it. You're going to walk into the hangar, and I'm going to have the lights on. It's going to be bright, nice and shined up. I've put some elbow grease into it the past couple days. And you're just going to fall in love with this airplane. And what I did is I polished up a turd. I polished this turd just enough to make you like it, and then you're going to fly away with it, and you've bought all of those problems. So
yeah, that's true. Okay, so here's number 3 on things to know before buying an airplane. If there's something wrong with it, should we still buy it?
Yeah, so let's say you're doing the pre-purchase inspection, and your pre-buy guy comes up with a pretty healthy squawk list, is what I would call that. And he basically says, hey, Seth, here's all the things that I found. These need to be corrected before I will advise you to buy this airplane. Because let's get this straight, a pre-buy or a pre-purchase inspection is not an FAA thing. It's just something that we do. There's nothing that guides you on what to do on this. But they find this squawk list of things that need to be corrected. So that's, again, I need to come in and I need to negotiate now and say, hey, I found this squawk list. Here are options. And an option I would give is you, the seller, correct all these things.
Yeah.
I buy the plane for what you're asking.
Yeah,
That'd be a good option. That'd probably be my go-to is you correct everything. I'll buy it for what we already agreed to. The other option would be, okay, I'm not going to buy it for what you're asking or what we agreed to because I've got to fix these. So discount the price. I'll fix them, but I get the plane at a lower price.
Yeah.
Or it could be a mix of that of like, hey, I'm going to negotiate a lower price, and then we're going to split the cost of the maintenance or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways you could skin the cat, so to speak, there.
Yeah. But I think, pre-buy, I've had friends that, they get a pre-buy inspection and they realize something $3,000 or $4,000 worth of work needs to be done. And then it's like, well, one, you can get the airplane cheaper, but two, it's like, well, I'm just automatically out $3,000 or $4,000 more dollars. So the pre-buy, even if it did cost you $2,000, I think average is usually around $1,000, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
It still saves you money in the long run, even if you didn't end up buying that plane because it's just way too bad or something.
Yeah, and then some of those are going to be a decision that you're going to have to make as a buyer. You may tell the seller, I found these 13 things wrong with your airplane. The seller may disagree with you. Like, I don't think that's an airworthiness. I don't think it affects the price. So I'm not going to fix it. So now it's kind of on you. You more than welcome to buy the airplane, but now you're going to have to fix that airplane. So, there's no, golden bullet here on how to handle this. There's no one solution. So that's why you just need somebody that's experienced in doing this sort of dance between a buyer and seller and a pre-buy.
All right, so the next thing we need to know as far as what we need to know before buying an airplane is, what is a timed out engine?
Yeah, so something we didn't cover that you could discover, a big portion of the pre-buy, so let's rewind just a second. A big portion of the pre-buy isn't poking around the airplane, it's looking through the logbooks.
Yeah.
So probably at least 2 to 3 hours is going to be spent by an experienced AMP going through the logbooks and figuring out how old are all of these components, all these life-limited components, how old are they? One of the biggest ones is the engine. Now, all engine manufacturers for certified engines have what's called a TBO, a time between overhaul. Now, there's service bulletins, which aren't obligatory for us to follow, but they're good recommendations. Service bulletins dictate, hey, this engine needs to be changed every 2,000 hours. That's a pretty common one, a 2,000-hour TBO. So if you see that on a airplane listing, that means the engine can be flown for 2,000 hours, then it needs to be changed. It's recommended to be changed. That engine might make it to 5,000 hours.
Yeah.
If it's flown correctly and is carefully maintained, you could definitely fly an engine over TBO safely, I would argue. Now, if you're putting this on a certificate, we won't talk about that. There's times where you have to follow that service bulletin. You don't have the option. But we'll just assume that none of our listeners are dealing with that. So as I look through the logbooks, I may discover, okay, this engine, they listed the engine as being a 20-hour engine. So that's almost a brand new engine, right? But then I realized that engine is 20 hours, but it doesn't say overhaul. It just says 20 hours since top overhaul, or 20 hours since bottom overhaul, or 20 hours since rebuild, right?
Yeah.
That's a common one. So what that means, all these terms mean different things.
Yeah.
So if the engine was overhauled 20 hours ago of flight time, but it was overhauled 15 years ago, so that means that that engine's only operated for 15 hours in the past 20 years. That's not good.
So I've dealt with this in the past. I went with a friend to go pick up an airplane, and he said that the overhaul, is like, it was, I want to say it had 400 or 500 hours left on the overhaul, and they said, well, the overhaul was done in 2014. I was like, well, it's getting pretty close, on year-wise. But then we started digging through the logbooks, and it was like 2004. And so that's pretty stale as far as like the engine is concerned.
Yeah, you brought up that same thing that sells us TBO also has a calendar year, which is typically 12 years. So if technically the engine needs to be overhauled every 12 years or 2,000 hours.
Yeah.
And that's just an example. This varies for each type of engine we're talking about. So again, this is something that a pre-purchase inspection is going to identify.
Yeah.
So if you do a pre-purchase inspection, your agent or you discover, hey, this is a 1,800-hour engine. So you've got 200 hours till overhaul. Should you buy that airplane? It depends, right?
Yeah.
If that plane has been on a good oil analysis program, if it's been hangared, if it hasn't been in a coastal area.
Yeah, so coastal areas are a little bit of a problem, more corrosion in those areas.
Yeah, so if this plane's been parked in a coastal area, it's got 1,800 hours on the engine, and it hasn't flown a lot, I think it's important to talk about why exactly flying regularly is important.
Yeah.
For that, you have to know how the internal of the engine works. And so just imagine you have all these gears essentially and rods splashing around in oil. And whenever the engine's running, it's splashing around in oil, and it's just a mess in there. Oil covers everything, which is good. We want the oil to cover everything. And modern oil has this component in it that makes it stick to everything. However, if the engine sits for long enough, that oil will kind of drip off all of the metal surfaces, and it'll drip down to the bottom of the case. Well, as you have temperature changes during the day, the engine will retain heat, lose heat, and it'll cause condensation. And so now you have metal surfaces that are exposed without oil on them that are getting condensation cycles.
Yeah.
And that's going to build up a little bit of rust. And so whenever that rust builds up and then you go to crank the engine again, that rust gets rubbed off and it creates what's called pitting. And that's a type of kind of corrosion. And the longer a plane has gone through that type of cycle of not running and then running and not running and running, that can cause a lot of damage to the engine over the long haul. And so you might have a 18 or 1500 hour engine that is really close to failure.
Yeah.
Versus an engine that gets run by flight school every single day might make it to 4,000 hours without any issues at all. So making the decision to buy a timed out or close to timed out engine, that can be a tough decision. And I've seen it turn out poorly, for sure, right? Somebody buys an engine that's almost timed out thinking that they're going to get a little more life out of it. And, it might make it
and it's
100
a
more
big
hours.
cost. A lot of people don't realize how big of a cost it is to have an engine overhauled.
Yeah.
Especially if you're new to aviation and you think you're getting a steal of a deal on an airplane.
Yeah, I would say minimum cost of an engine overhaul, no matter what the airplane really, is around $20,000.
Yeah.
Minimum. And then I just was helping an A&P friend of mine down the road, and he's working on an $80,000 overhaul. So $80,000 engine, just the engine. We're not talking about the airplane.
That's crazy.
It's an $80,000 overhaul.
That's crazy.
So.
And so you bought an airplane not too long ago that was close to overhaul. And what was your thought process on that?
Yeah, I bought a 172. We might have even done a video in it, or there might be some videos out there of me and my daughter flying it. And it was, I since sold it because I've just focused on the multi stuff and didn't really need the single. It had come from New Mexico. We had done what's called an oil analysis program.
Yeah.
Engines are kind of neat. There's different metals on different components of the engine. And that microscopic metal gets rubbed off and drains into the oil. So if you take an oil sample and you send it to a company that does oil analysis, they can tell you, hey, they're based on the amount of nickel in this engine or copper or this alloy, we think your engine might be about to fail, basically.
Yeah.
Or this component might be, maybe you have a bad valve seat or you have a bad cam. Or, hey, this is totally normal wear for an engine that we see at 1,800 hours. And so we had done an oil analysis on it. The engine ran really good. The compressions were good. That's something you'll hear is compressions are good, so the engine's good. That's not the case. You can have good compressions on a really bad engine. So
That's good to know. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, you could definitely have good compressions on an engine that's just totally about to fail. And that's one of the overhauls that I talked about earlier is a top overhaul.
Yeah.
Let's say you buy an engine and it's like, well, it is freshly top overhauled.
Yeah, I've been told, well, that's the poor man's overhaul.
Yeah, well, what we're talking about in the top is that means that the cylinder and all of their components, all the cylinders have been overhauled or been replaced. The case itself hasn't been broken because the case fits together like a clamshell. There's two halves. So the case hasn't been broken, which means the cam hasn't been changed and the crankshaft hasn't been changed. Now, the problem is the things that are going to cause catastrophic failures in an engine are your bearings.
Yeah.
The only way to look at a bearing in an engine is to split the case. I have even when I do a top overhaul, pull all the cylinders off, and it looks like that engine's almost completely disassembled. The way the case halves meet together, I can't actually inspect the bearing surfaces.
Yeah.
So, and those are critical. If the bearings fail, the engine, you'll have a catastrophic failure, period. So you could be having some major problems with the bearings and never know, even though you did a top overhaul. And also, bearing wear isn't necessarily going to cause bad compressions. You might have really good compressions and about to be having a type of main bearing failure. So
That's good to know. Okay, so let's move on. What kind of avionics do we need, and can I afford to upgrade if the plane doesn't have what I need?
Yeah, so in general, I would recommend buying an airplane that has the avionics that you need. And I'm glad you used that phrase of the avionics you need, because it's easy to get on Facebook or Instagram and see the avionics that we want.
Yeah.
There's some really cool looking avionics out there, but they're really expensive. Certified avionics are not cheap, and installing them are not cheap. And that's the first sticker shock you get is you can get online and you can see prices like a G5. Oh, G5 is only $1,800 or $3,000 was a G5. Well, that's just for the G5. You got to pay somebody to install it.
I've heard basically whatever price you see, you can double it. Is that about right?
That's a good kind of spitball of just double the price, and that's your installation. Now, you could find somebody to install it cheaper potentially, so results may vary. In general, you're only going to get about 50% of the investment back when you go to sell the airplane. So if you spend $10,000 in avionics, you're only going to really increase the value of the plane by about $5,000.
That's good to know.
And then as far as installing them, you're looking at pretty long wait times. I recently I manage a King Air. We had the avionics installed. It took 9 months for the avionics to come in. And then it took 2 months to do the install.
So here's a question.
So the plane was down for the better part of a year.
That's
so
crazy.
Just imagine if you go out and spend $30,000 on this plane thinking that you're going to throw some avionics in it and then go fly. And then here you are owning this pretty expensive thing that you can't use while it's getting upgraded for a year.
Here's a question, too, I had, because I've looked at, upgrading some of my avionics in the past. And, if I were to get like a G5 or something, what's the likelihood of that talking to, the NavAid radios that I have and, that sort of thing, like compatibility issues? How often would you buy like a piece of equipment and then also need to upgrade something else because it doesn't talk to it?
Yeah, and that brings up a good point for a couple different reasons. One of the reasons is the big expense of avionics is installation. You're almost... As a rule, I think you're going to spend more on installation than you do the equipment. The reason is there's a lot of wires and stuff back there, and it takes a lot of time for an avionics technician to pull your panel out, do all the wiring, and put everything back in. That's kind of think of that as a fixed cost. For me to remove the panel, redo wiring bundles, and put it back in. It doesn't matter if I replace one piece of avionics or if I replace 5. The expense of removing that panel and redoing wiring harnesses is going to be about the same. So that pretty quickly I get down to this kind of avionics upgrade creep where I started out with just wanting a single G5, and then I added a second, and then a 275, and then a new transponder and a new intercom. Because and the avionics technicians, part of them are trying to upsell you, but they're also trying to manage their time, and they're like, okay, Seth, here's the deal. If you think you want a new GPS, wait to do this install until you can afford the new GPS, because you don't want to wait on me as a shop to spend 20 hours, well, realistically, probably 80 hours of installation to do a G5, and then you have to pay me another 80 hours for installation of a GPS 2 years later. Right? Because it would have been, it might have been 90 hours to install both at the same time. So basically, you just overpaid by 70 hours of labor that you just, wasted essentially.
Yeah, that's a good point. But then you also get into the, if a student pilot were to buy, a basic VFR airplane, but they actually had plans in getting their instrument rating and the commercial rating, it's not even really beneficial to purchase an airplane that's not capable of IFR.
Yeah, and you kind of ask, well, what kind of avionics does my plane need? Well, if I'm a basic private pilot, I need, you can read in 91205 what you need. But, your basic 6-pack of instruments, that's what I need, right, as far as flight instruments. Which of those need to be electronic? None of them have to be, right? But then I also need some sort of navigation. If that's just a VOR, that's fine. However, doing my instrument rating with just that VOR is going to be challenging, mainly because it's hard to find VOR approaches and ILS approaches. And I'm saying most indicators can give you both VOR and an ILS. That would be the minimum. for the instrument approach, or for the instrument check ride, the plane has to be 411 and 413 compliant. Those are two inspections. So 91-411 and 91-413, that's your pitot-static, transponder, and altitude encoder system. Just because a plane has a VOR or even a GPS doesn't mean that it could actually pass a 411 and 413 check. Because what's going to happen is the avionics shop is going to pressurize your pitot-static system and see if it can hold pressure and report the correct altitude. If you've got an old pitot-static system, there may be a lot of labor involved to replace those lines to make it 411, 413 compliant, because that's what it has to be in order for us to take the check ride. And then for the check ride itself, we need to be able to do 2 non-precision approaches to 2 different nav aids. So like a VOR localizer would work, or an RNAV approach and a localizer. And then we need to be able to do a precision approach, so an ILS, or it allows us to substitute an RNAV approach with LPV minimums. So that's the basic would be, a VOR with an indicator. Where you can tune in and identify a localizer and a VOR station. Just know that when you start doing your instrument check or your instrument training, you're going to have to travel to a place that has that equipment, and that's few and far between nowadays. So I would recommend getting an RNAV equipped aircraft, and also an RNAV equipped airplane that doesn't have some antiquated RNAV in it that you can't update the database anymore, because that's another check ride requirement. Is if you're going to use the RNAV system on the check ride, the database has to be updated on the day of the check ride, or it has to be up to date on the day of the check ride. So if you've got this old Apollo system that they don't have a card reader for anymore, or you can't buy a database for, it's good practice, but you can't use that for check ride.
Yeah, because I think ours is I can't remember the model it is, but it's a Garmin, and it's an older model. We're still able to update the database, but it's still antiquated, and it's just like it's not easy to use.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's a constant game of trade-offs.
Yeah.
Because if you go with used avionics, you could run into that problem with the Apollo of let's say you buy a non-WAS 430. Well, Garmin just announced, it's 2023 now, this year. I think in 2021 they announced they're not going to fix 430s anymore. So you might be able to get a really good deal on a 430, but then the repair capability is gone. So you spend $8,000 on the 430 and getting it installed, and then 2 years later it goes out. How are you going to repair that 430?
I did not know that, and I've been looking at the 430s on Facebook Marketplace. Like, oh yeah, that's what I'm going to get.
Yeah, so I think they sunset the 430. The 430 WAS will probably be next. The 530 WAS, because I mean, part of it is probably Garmin wants to make money. That's part of it. But the other thing is, those are really old units that they don't want to spend time fixing anymore. They want to focus on the new GTN series of avionics, which are more expensive. But again, the trade-off is their longevity is going to be a lot. You're going to have support for those avionics into the future, whereas the 430 might not.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, so the next thing you need to know before buying an airplane, where are you going to put the thing after you buy it?
Yeah, this is important, and I've even seen people, and I can kind of tell who's serious about buying an airplane when they come into my office or talk to me on the phone. The people that are more serious are generally ones that already have a hangar, and I really appreciate that, because it's really the way you should go about it. It's like, hey, I want to buy an airplane. First thing I'm going to do is find a hangar, and I might wait a year or two or even longer for that hangar to pop up. And okay, there's the hangar. I buy the hangar. Now I'm ready for an airplane. I think that's a responsible way to go about it. So I've dealt with several clients that already have a hangar, but they don't have an airplane. I think that's totally fine. That's a good way to go about it. What you don't want to do is buy the plane and then be like, oh man, I'm going to have to park this out on the ramp, and now there's a 2-year wait list.
Yeah.
And okay, now I found a hangar 45 minutes away or an hour away at this grass strip, and that has its own safety concerns and usability concerns. Yeah. And that's just one thing leads to another. So, yeah, I would highly recommend having a hangar. Finding a hangar can be difficult. depending on where you're at.
Let's talk about just for a minute. I know like hanger rental is usually not super expensive, but like if I were to buy a hanger, like if I was considering buying a hanger, like the property that the hanger sits on, because I think a lot of people don't know about how the land underneath the hanger is leased sometimes.
Yeah, so there's two basic ways. It could be a federally funded airport or a non-federally funded airport or privately owned airport. And those are typically air parks.
Yeah.
So if you go to an air park, you can own the land, just like you own the land that your house sits on. You can build a hangar and you'll own it forever until you decide to sell it, right? Well, if you are at a public airport like Russellville here, I lease this hangar. This hangar is actually one of the oldest hangars on the field. And even if I were to tear this down and build one, pay for it myself, the airport would only lease the land to me for about 50 years. After 50 years, the airport would take possession of whatever sits on that land. And if that's my hangar, then now the airport owns my hangar, and I have to start paying rent to a hangar that I built 50 years ago. So there's a little bit of and that's important to know of what your land lease terms are for your local airport, because maybe somebody realizes that their lease is about to expire on their land in 2 years. And they come up to you and be like, hey, Josh, I'll sell you my hangar. You can buy it for $10,000. And you're like, wow, I can buy a hangar for $10,000. Well, if you don't read the lease close enough, you realize that, well, your lease expires in 2 years. What happens after that? Well, the airport owns it, and you have to start paying rent. So effectively, he's asking $5,000 a year in rent, basically, is what you're doing. And then after that, you're going to have to start paying rent. That may be worth it, depending on the market you're at.
Yeah.
Right? You may be, in places like any Metroplex area, you might be paying more than $5,000 a month or a year to keep your airplane.
I've seen some airports where they give you the option to renew the lease of the land underneath, and then you would continue to own the hangar above, as long as they were happy with the way you were maintaining the hangar.
Yeah, there's all different schemes. Some airports are more critical about it than other airports. The main thing to remember is that if it's a federally funded, if it receives FAA funding, you can't actually own the land in most cases on that property, right? You can lease it, and then you get into kind of the legal definition of what is ownership, and generally, anything less than 99 years, over 99 years, then that kind of crosses the threshold. Well, you actually own it. The leases used to be 99-year leases. You'd see a lot of those. Now that's dropped back to like 35, 50 years.
Yeah. Probably so they can maintain what type of buildings they have on the airfield and stuff.
Yeah, I guess. I don't really haven't put a lot of thought into why they do it that way, but yeah.
All right, so the last thing you need to know before buying an airplane, what should I know about airworthiness directives?
Oh man, ADs.
This is probably one of the most complicated topics out there, and even as a CFI, I can look at the airworthiness directives in the the logbooks and be like, okay, well, this one's been done, this one's been done, this one needs to be done, or blah blah blah. But if your airplane logbooks aren't together, a lot of times you don't know what airworthiness directives you need.
Exactly.
And so it's pretty complicated.
Yeah, so like high level, you've got airworthiness directives for your airframe, engine, propeller, and accessories.
Yeah.
Those are the 4 ADs. As an owner, you're responsible for ADs.
Yeah.
100% on you as the owner. An engine can have a lot, like accessories include magnetos. So I don't just need to know what model of engine I have. I need to know the model and sometimes even serial number of the magnetos. So I'm only going to discover that stuff in a very careful pre-purchase inspection. And then we just continue going down the rabbit hole. So if you want to learn more about ADs, we're going to do an entire show.
Yeah, let's go ahead and cut it off right here. And let's go ahead and make an entire episode just focused on ADs. And I'm going to have Seth with me, and he's going to answer some of my questions because I'm still learning, and I think everybody should always be learning. But
oh yeah, as am I. it's a big subject and it deserves its own episode. So I think that's what we're gonna do a deep dive into next.
Sounds good. Well, if you want to watch that video, you can watch it right here. We'll see you over there.
Thanks for watching.